I've learned something in my journey of faith that I wish I could have grasped sooner. When you truly believe that God is with you, the word impossible starts to lose its meaning. I used to see obstacles as closed doors, signs that maybe I was on the wrong path. But over time, I realized those so-called walls weren't meant to stop me. They were there to reveal just how powerful God could be when I trusted Him fully. There were seasons in my life when I prayed for something that seemed completely out of reach. Every logical thought in my head told me it couldn't happen. People around me even confirmed my fears, saying, "Maybe this just isn't for you." And honestly, I almost believed them. But in that quiet place between doubt and hope, God whispered into my spirit, "I am not limited by what you see." That was the moment I understood. Faith doesn't ignore reality, it invites God into it. Faith isn't about pretending problems don't exist. It's about knowing that problems can't dictate the outcome when God has spoken. I think of times when the Red Sea stood in the way of the Israelites, or when the walls of Jericho seemed impenetrable. On paper, those situations were impossible. But faith isn't written on paper. It's written in the heart of a believer who knows their God is bigger than the facts. And when moves, the impossible doesn't just become possible, it becomes inevitable. There is a shift that happens when you start walking with that mindset. You stop asking, "Can God do this?" and start declaring, "God will do this." Your language changes. Your prayers shift from timid requests to bold declarations. You stop pacing the floor in worry and start standing in confidence, even before the breakthrough shows up. That's not arrogance, it's alignment with God's promises. I remember a time when I was completely stuck. Every door seemed closed, every plan I tried failed, and I was on the verge of giving up. But instead of running away from the situation, I decided to stand still and ask God for direction. I didn't hear an immediate answer, but I held on, and in the weeks that followed, an opportunity came from a place I hadn't even considered. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was God's way of showing me that my faith had unlocked something my own efforts couldn't. Here's what I've learned. Faith doesn't just change outcomes, it changes you. You start walking differently. You carry yourself with quiet assurance. Even when you're in the middle of the storm, you start talking like someone who knows the sun is coming. People around you notice. They see you facing the same challenges everyone else faces, but with a different spirit. And sometimes that faith becomes contagious. It inspires others to believe for their own breakthroughs. When you believe that the impossible is inevitable with God, you also stop fearing delays. You stop thinking, "It's too late," or "I've missed my chance." You realize God doesn't operate on our clocks. The timing might not be what you planned, but it will always be perfect. Sometimes the delay isn't a denial, it's preparation. God is aligning circumstances, moving hearts, and setting the stage so that when the promise comes, you'll be ready to receive it. Of course, living like this isn't always easy. Doubt will still try to creep in. The enemy will try to convince you that you're foolish for believing. But I found that every time I choose faith over fear, something shifts. Even if I can't see it right away, I know something in the spiritual realm is moving in my favor. And here's the most powerful part. When you start living with that kind of faith, your prayers change from "God, please do this," to "God, thank you that it's already done." You stop approaching Him as if you're begging for scraps and start speaking to Him as a child who knows their father owns the table. You begin to praise Him in advance, not just when the blessing shows up. Looking back, some of the greatest miracles in my life didn't happen because I was the smartest, most talented, or best prepared. They happened because I dared to believe when everything else said it couldn't happen. And now, whenever I face something that looks too big for me, I remind myself, it's not too big for God. So I live with this quiet, unwavering conviction that what God has promised me is already on its way. The process might be longer than I expect. The road might have detours I didn't plan for. But the outcome, that's settled. And because I know that, I can move forward without fear, without hesitation, and without giving up halfway. The truth is, the impossible is only impossible until God steps in. And when he does, it stops being a matter of if and becomes a matter of when. That's why I choose to live like nothing can stop me, because with God, nothing can. The victory is already written. My job is just to keep walking in faith until I see it unfold. And maybe that's what someone needs to hear today. You've been carrying the weight of an impossible situation, wondering if you'll ever see the other side. I'm here to tell you, you will. Not because you're strong enough, but because God is. And when you decide to believe that, everything changes. The fear starts to fade. The pressure lifts. And hope begins to take root again. That's the power of faith. It doesn't just move mountains. It convinces you that the mountain was never permanent to begin with. And when you live with that truth in your heart, you stop worrying about how things will work out and start living in the certainty that they will. Because with God, the impossible isn't just possible, it's inevitable. I've come to realize that fear is one of the enemy's most effective weapons, and yet, when you look closely, it's nothing more than a shadow. It feels real, it looks real, but the moment God's truth shines on it, it disappears. For a long time I didn't see it that way. I thought fear was just part of life. Something I had to accept. I'd feel it in my chest, in my thoughts, in the way I hesitated before making decisions. Fear would tell me, "You're not ready," or "You're going to fail." And I'd believe it because it felt so convincing. But then I realized something changing. Just because a thought is loud doesn't mean it's true. Fear thrives in darkness. It grows in the absence of God's word. The more I ignored the promises of God, the stronger fear seemed. But when I started replacing those fearful thoughts with his truth, fear started to shrink. The first time I experienced that shift, I was stunned. It was like watching a fog lift and realizing the danger I thought was ahead wasn't even there. That's when I understood. Fear is a liar, and its lies can't survive in the light of God's truth. I remember standing at a crossroads in my life, afraid to move forward because everything ahead was uncertain. Fear whispered every possible bad outcome into my mind. It was painting pictures of failure before I'd even taken a step. But one day I opened my Bible and read, "God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind." It hit me hard. If fear isn't from God, then why am I letting it control me? That question broke something inside me. It made me see fear not as a feeling to manage, but as an enemy to confront. Once you know the truth, you can't unsee it. Every time fear tried to creep back in, I started speaking God's promises out loud. I can do all things through Christ. Greater is he who is in me than he who is in the world. At first it felt strange to talk back to fear, but I noticed something. Fear doesn't know how to respond when you stop agreeing with it. It can only control you if you nod along with its lies. The moment you refuse to agree, it starts losing its grit. The more I fed myself on God's truth, the less room there was for fear to grow. I realized that fear had always been based on assumptions, on what-ifs that hadn't even happened. God's truth, on the other hand, is based on unshakable reality. His power, his faithfulness, his promises. And when I compared the two, I saw that fear wasn't even in the same league as the truth. It's not that I never feel fear anymore. It still tries to show up, but now I see it for what it is. I can tell the difference between a warning from God's Spirit and the intimidation tactics of the enemy. The Holy Spirit's guidance leads to peace, even in risk. Fear leads to paralysis. When I sense fear trying to hold me back, I remind myself, this isn't God's voice. His voice calls me forward, not backward. One of the most freeing realizations I've ever had is that fear doesn't have to be absent for me to move forward. I used to wait for fear to completely go away before taking a step. But if I had kept waiting, I'd still be standing in the same place. Now I know that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving anyway. because you trust God's truth more than you trust your feelings. God's truth says, I am loved, I am chosen, I am equipped, I am never alone. Fear says the opposite. But here's the thing, only one of those voices can be right. And every time God's truth wins. I've walked into situations that terrified me, my hands shaking, my voice trembling, but I went anyway because I knew God's promises didn't depend on my comfort level, and every time I came out stronger. The enemy wants us to believe that fear is a sign to stop, when in reality, it's often a sign we're close to something important. Fear doesn't waste its energy on insignificant things. It shows up when we're about to step into territory that matters. That's why I've learned to treat fear as a signal, not a stop sign. When it tries to block me, I take it as confirmation that I'm moving in the right direction. And then I press in harder to God's truth. One of the most powerful moments of my life came when I faced a situation that, on paper, should have overwhelmed me. I didn't have the resources, the experience, or the perfect plan. Fear was screaming, "This will be the end of you," but I decided to lean on God's word instead of my own understanding. I kept reminding myself, if God is for me, who can be against me? And you know what happened? What I feared never came to pass. Instead, I saw God make a way where there was none. That's when I realized fear had been lying the entire time. I think that's why the Bible so often tells us, do not fear. It's not a suggestion, it's a command. God wouldn't command it if it weren't possible. And the way we obey that command is by replacing fear with truth, moment by moment, thought by thought. Now, when fear shows up, I don't see it as a personal weakness. I see it as an opportunity to lean deeper into God's promises. I speak His truth out loud, even if my voice shakes. I remind myself that God has already gone ahead of me, that He knows the end from the beginning, and that His plan is to give me a hope and a future. Fear can try all it wants, but it simply can't survive in that kind of atmosphere. So I live with this unshakable conviction. Fear may knock on my door, but I don't have to let it in. The truth of God is my anchor, my weapon, my shield. And no matter how loud fear shouts, it will never be louder than the voice of the one who calls me his own. Fear is a lie, and God's truth is the only reality worth believing. And when you live in that truth, you'll find that fear doesn't just lose its power. It loses its place in your life entirely. I've learned that the size of my problems doesn't define me. The size of my purpose does. For a long time, I got stuck focusing on what was going wrong in my life. Every setback felt like a personal failure. Every obstacle like a sign I wasn't cut out for the path I was on. But over time, I realized something that changed everything. The weight of my challenges was proof of the weight of my calling. The enemy doesn't waste his energy on people who aren't going anywhere. The greater the purpose, the greater the resistance. I used to think problems meant I was doing something wrong, but now I see they often mean I'm doing something right. Think about it. If your life has no impact, why would anything try to stop you? The very fact that you're facing pushback might be the clearest sign that you're on the road God has marked for you. That understanding shifted my perspective completely. Instead of asking, why me? I started asking, why not me? If God placed a purpose inside me that's bigger than the problems I face, then my job isn't to escape the fight, it's to outlast it. I remember a season when it felt like everything I touched fell apart. Plans failed, relationships strained, opportunities closed. It was exhausting. But then one day in prayer, I felt God remind me that the storms I was facing weren't random. They were sharpening me. They were preparing me for something I couldn't yet see. That's when I started looking at my problems differently. They weren't roadblocks, they were training grounds. Every challenge was equipping me with the strength, resilience, and wisdom I would need for the greater assignment ahead. When I think about purpose, I think about people like Joseph in the Bible. He had a vision from God about his future, but before he reached it, He was betrayed, enslaved, and imprisoned. On paper, it looked like his life was falling apart, but in reality, every setback was positioning him for the moment he'd step into his destiny. If Joseph had judged his calling by his current circumstances, he would have given up. And maybe that's the trap so many of us fall into. We let temporary struggles convince us to quit on eternal purposes. I've come to see that my problems are not the enemy. They're the proof. He proved that there's something inside me worth fighting for. They prove that God trusts me enough to carry weight that others might not be able to handle. And honestly, that realization lit a fire in me. I stopped praying for smaller problems and started praying for stronger shoulders. Because I know that when I outlast the challenges in front of me, I'm stepping into something far greater than I can imagine. One thing I've noticed is that problems always feel bigger when I lose sight of the bigger picture. When I get tunnel vision, all I see is the immediate pain, the frustration, the confusion. But when I zoom out and remember why I'm doing this in the first place, the problems shrink. They're still there, but they don't feel as heavy because I know they're just part of the journey. You can't carry a great purpose without carrying some weight. It's part of the process. There's also something about walking in purpose that gives you the endurance to keep going when nothing makes sense. Purpose gives pain a reason. It turns suffering into seed. It makes you realize that what you're going through is not just for you. It's for the people you're called to impact. And when you understand that, you stop making decisions based on comfort and start making them based on calling. I've had days where the problems felt overwhelming, where I thought, this is too much, I can't keep going. But in those moments, I've also felt a quiet strength rise up inside me, a voice reminding me, you're not done yet, this is just part of the story. And I've learned that sometimes the hardest seasons are the ones that produce the most fruit. The deeper the struggle, the more meaningful the victory. The truth is, purpose is rarely convenient. It will ask more of you than you think you can give. It will stretch you, challenge you, and sometimes even break you down so you can be rebuilt stronger. But every time you choose to keep going, every time you refuse to let problems define you, you get one step closer to becoming the person God designed you to be. What I love most about living with a purpose bigger than my problems is that it changes how I measure success. I'm no longer obsessed with avoiding pain or chasing comfort. My goal is impact. My goal is faithfulness. My goal is to finish my race knowing I didn't let fear, inconvenience, or obstacles stop me from doing what I was born to do. And when you live like that, problems stop being walls. They become stepping stones. So now, when trouble comes, I don't immediately panic. I pause and ask, what is this trying to teach me? What is this preparing me for? Because I know that nothing in my life is wasted. Not the tears, not the delays, not the disappointments. God is weaving it all together to serve the purpose He placed inside me long before I faced these challenges. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone who feels buried under the weight of their problems, it's this: your purpose is worth more than your pain. The problem you're facing now will one day be the story you tell to inspire someone else to keep going. The setback that feels like the end might actually be the setup for the most important chapter of your life. I don't want to get to the end of my life and realize I let small battles keep me from big victories. I want to know that I kept moving forward, not because it was easy, but because I knew the mission mattered. And the truth is, when God has called you to something, no problem is big enough to cancel His plan. That's why I live with this deep conviction. My purpose will always outlast my problems. The fight may be hard, but it's not final, and every challenge I face is just another chance to prove that nothing, not fear, not failure, not even my own doubts, can stop what God has started in me. I've learned that when God is leading the way, the outcome is already settled. The battle might still have to be fought, The journey might still have twists and turns, but the victory isn't up for debate. It's guaranteed. I used to think that winning meant having everything go smoothly, no obstacles, no resistance. But the truth is, some of the most certain victories in my life came in seasons where everything looked like defeat. The difference was, I wasn't walking on my own strength. I was following God's lead. There's a peace that comes when you know the one guiding you sees the end from the beginning. I've been in situations where I had no idea how things would work out. I didn't have the resources, the plan, or even the confidence to see it through. But I kept feeling that quiet nudge from God saying, "Trust me, keep walking." And every time I did, He brought me to a place I could never have reached on my own. That's when I realized God doesn't lead you into a battle without already securing the win. The world will tell you to measure success by what you can see, but faith teaches you to measure it by what God has promised. There have been moments when everything in my surroundings screamed failure, but deep inside, I knew the story wasn't over. I'd seen too many times before how God turned the impossible around. I'd seen Him part seas, open prison doors, and bring down walls that people swore could never fall. And every time He did, it was a reminder that when He leads, the result is never in question. One of the biggest shifts in my life happened when I stopped trying to control the route and started trusting the guide. I used to pray for God's help, but still insist on steering the wheel myself. That only led to frustration. But when I learned to actually let Him lead, not just in words, but in surrender, my perspective changed. I stopped stressing about every detail because I realized that the pressure to make it work wasn't on me. My job was to obey. His job was to deliver the victory. That doesn't mean the road is easy. In fact, sometimes following God will take you straight into situations that look impossible. I've been there, standing in front of a Red Sea moment, wondering how in the world I was going to cross. But the beauty of those moments is that they're the perfect stage for God to show His power. If I could handle everything myself, I wouldn't need Him. It's in the times where I have no choice but to trust Him that I see Him work in ways that leave me speechless. There's a confidence that comes from walking behind God instead of running ahead of Him. When I try to force things to happen on my own timeline, I end up drained and disappointed. But when I follow His timing, even delays have purpose. I've learned that what feels like a setback is often God setting the stage for a bigger win than I imagined. Just because I don't see the victory yet doesn't mean it's not already mine. It just means He's still arranging the details. One thing I know for sure is that God never leads us to lose. It's not in His nature. He's not setting us up for failure. He's setting us up for testimony. Sometimes the victory looks different than I expected, but it's always better than what I would have settled for. I've prayed for open doors only to have God redirect me to something far greater than what I was asking for. And every time I look back and think, I'm so glad I didn't settle for my plan. When God leads, even the battles become part of the blessing. I've gone through seasons that stretched me, hurt me, and tested my faith in ways I didn't think I could endure. But when I came out the other side, I realized those battles were the very things that prepared me to handle the blessing. The victory wasn't just in the outcome. It was in the person I became along the way. I think about David facing Goliath. By all human standards, he didn't stand a chance. But David wasn't walking into that battle alone. He knew the God who had delivered him from lions and bears would deliver him again. He didn't fight wondering if he might win. He fought knowing he couldn't lose. That's the kind of confidence that comes from letting God lead the way. There's a verse that says, if God is for us, who can be against us? That's not just a nice saying, it's a reality. I've faced opposition, setbacks, and even seasons where I felt like I was surrounded. But every time I've stayed aligned with God's leading, I've seen Him turn the tables in ways I never expected. The very things meant to break me ended up building me. The very people who doubted me had to watch God fulfill his promises. And that's the thing, when God guarantees victory, it's not just about you, it's about everyone who's watching your journey. Your win becomes a testimony to others that if God can do it for you, he can do it for them too. That's why I don't just fight for my own outcome. I fight knowing that my faith might be the spark that ignites someone else's. So now, when I feel God leading me into something bigger than myself, I don't panic. I remind myself that he's never lost a battle and he's not about to start with mine. I may not know how he'll do it, but I know he will, and that assurance gives me the strength to keep going, even when the road gets rough. At the end of the day, victory with God isn't a maybe, it's a certainty. It's not a question of if, it's only a question of when. My job is to stay close to him, follow his lead, and keep moving forward no matter how the situation looks, because the one who leads me has already declared the outcome. And when he says it's finished, it's finished. That's why I walk with my head high, even in the middle of the fight. I know how this story ends. I know that the same God who's brought me through before will do it again. And I know that as long as he's leading the way, victory is not just possible, it's already mine.